It's Michael Kinnett again with iTurtle Networks. Thanks for joining me today on this live stream. If you're watching later, thanks for taking the time to watch it later. It's a beautiful spring day today. Hopefully everyone gets a chance to be outside and enjoy the nice weather before it gets too hot. So this is our, I don't know what number we're up to, 5 or 6 now, of our Friday live streams, where we're discussing the Ukraine-Russia cyber conflict and your cyber safety, right? So same format as previous weeks. I'll spend a few minutes talking about the latest in the cyber news related to Russia, Ukraine, and other things, and then a few minutes talking about a tip, and then a few minutes answering any questions that might come up. So it's been, once again, another busy week. A couple of interesting things of news related here. So I thought this one was really, kind of a new low for phishing, right? So April 4th, this last week, the Security Service of Ukraine, the SSCIP, I think I got that right, they warned of a phishing campaign that they were starting to see that was purporting to be a news information titled "Information on War Criminals of the Russian Federation." So these are Russian hackers that are phishing Ukraine with fake news about their war criminals, trying to entice them to click on it. So that's definitely that's a new one. This is a very big one. April 6th, so just 2 days ago, the Justice Department had a big announcement. They announced that there was a court-authorized disruption. So they worked secretly through the court system. They didn't want news getting out about this, but they received approval from the courts in order to go and take down this botnet network that was run by what's believed to be the Russian Federation's main intelligence directorate, which is the GRU. And so this botnet is called Cyclops Blink, and it had been deployed on thousands of systems. And what a botnet is it's a small program that a hacker gets and can place on a system, and it can be, they've been known to be on cameras, right? So if you have a network camera, doorbells, pretty much any of the IoT devices that are connected to the network, right? A hacker, if there's a vulnerability, can place a botnet on there with this code that they can then trigger. Run on Windows, Apple, Linux, you name it, it pretty much can run on it if it's connected to the internet, depending on how they write their code. And what this botnet does is every once in a while, it will check in with home, right? So it's a command and control. So it sends a little message back to home that says, hey, do you want me to do anything yet? Nope, right? And it just sits there and waits. It sits dormant, waiting for home base, right? This command and control node, this network command center, right? To then say, okay, here's what we want you to do now. And a lot of times botnets are used for massive denial of service attacks and other types of cyber attacks. But then instead of coming from the hacker's computer, they come from the botnet computers wherever they are around the world. So Russia had thousands of these Cyclops Blink botnets deployed around the globe, and the US Justice Department, in collaboration with UK, United Kingdom, and WatchGuard, and a few others, basically collected the information and went after and took down this network. So they even, I've read a couple of conflicting articles. One article said that they even went in and removed it from some of the infected systems, possibly without the knowledge or approval of a company or individual that system had been breached. I did not find that in the article about the Justice Department, their announcement, so I don't know if that's, you know how the news is. Sometimes people read into things and say it as fact when it's not. So I couldn't confirm that, but some very interesting things out there. They took it down. The U.S. government has been very careful in everything that they've done with this conflict to not be seen as an aggressor, right? So there's the economic sanctions and everything else, but we don't want to be seen giving jets to Ukraine or sending troops over there or doing anything that can be seen by Russia as aggression. And that goes with the cyber security side as well. So this was a big one, and it was more of a defensive, right? It was basically going in and taking out the ability for Russia to use these. So we weren't attacking Russia or their cyber division, all we were doing was neutralizing the risk of them using these botnets that had been deployed on other businesses and user systems. So that was very big news for their good for the Justice Department and their allies in taking that down. All right, let's see, it's been a few minutes. There's a few other things. Cyber insurance, routers reported last week that there's a bunch of claims related to the Ukraine thing for cyber insurance and other stuff. I think I'm talking about the news. I think we can move on, but there's plenty of other things that I could discuss. Just know that everything is still very active and very fluid in what's going on over there in Ukraine with this cyber warfare stuff that's going on. All right, so my big tip for today is to have a plan, right? And you need multiple plans that can all be kind of part of a bigger overall plan, but you need to have a cybersecurity plan in place. And I've talked before about our booklet that we have, cybersecurity for small business owners, where it kind of goes through the CIS control framework, which is for CIS controls, which is based on the NIST framework. And essentially that's an outline of good controls and protocols that you should put in place to have good hygiene for your cybersecurity. And there's 3 different levels of that. So, if you're interested in receiving a copy of the booklet, send me a message. Love to send you a copy or drop it by your office. That can help you in developing your plan. But you need to have a plan for what type of security controls do we want to have in place, right? What are our policies? What does that look like, right? So this is the defensive, right? Here's everything we're going to do to prevent an attack, prevent a breach, to prevent whatever situation that you don't want to have happen, right? So building that plan out, what are you going to use for endpoint security, for managed response, for firewalls, for MFA, what level of passwords are you going to require? You're going to require encryption, right? All of that is part of that plan. So build that plan out. Well, then you need a plan for what happens if my preventative plan fails, right? And you may decide to have this all in one plan. You might split it out in 2, right? You could have a cyber response plan. You could also have a disaster recovery plan, right? So a disaster recovery plan I'll talk about first. And what that is essentially, it's okay, well, my system's offline, my server crashed, we lost access to this data, we have no internet, we have no power, like some sort of a disaster that's preventing your technology from operating in a way that you can run your business. What do you do, right? How do you communicate with your staff? How do you function? Do you have remote work capabilities? How do you recover from that potential loss of data or whatever it is, right? So that's a specific disaster recovery plan. Now, a cyber response plan is specific to some sort of a cyber attack, breach, ransomware, very specific on the cybersecurity realm. Whereas the disaster recovery could just be hard drives failed on your server, and now what do you do, right? Out of power, what do you do? Not necessarily related to a cyber attack. And there's definitely a lot of overlap in those plans. So you could incorporate both of them and just have, kind of a, if this happens, here's the part of the plan, and if this happens, here's the part of the plan. But cyber response is going to have very different requirements than just a backup disaster recovery response, right? You may have to, there are laws in the state of Nevada on who do you need to notify if you are attacked with ransomware. You may have to, if you have a cyber insurance policy, you're going to need to immediately notify your insurance. They're going to have their cyber response team that's going to come in and assist you in mitigating and recovering. So there's definitely a lot to be taken in a cyber response plan, right? And I highly recommend, if you don't have one, start developing one. Once you have that plan, test it. Do a run through, do a mock ransomware attack or whatever scenario you want to go through, and make sure that your team knows how to follow the plan and how to respond. That's the absolute best way of being able to respond in the actual event of an emergency. Police, fire, any of our emergency responders, military, right? They train and train and train and train so that when they get hit with a scenario, it's instinct, right? You do this, you do this, you do this. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go out and train as hard as our first responders and military, but you need to do some training so that if it does happen, you know, everybody's not panicking and running around. There's a step-by-step guide to follow. And doing that scenario is the best way to find any gaps in your plan. It's like, oh, well, you know, did we need to notify the CEO who's on vacation, or did we need to do this or that, right? Going through that scenario, you're going to be able to find those gaps and improve your plan overall. So build a plan and then run through it, do a test scenario at least once a year. You know, I would suggest, you know, depending on how concerned you are with cybersecurity, maybe even more frequently than that. So that's my tip for the day. Let's see here, comments. I don't know if we have any questions that have come up. I don't see any posted on here. I did see a question come up the other day. Someone asked, I can talk about this. They asked about, on their firewall, should they block all access to Russia, you know, IP addresses and websites from Russia? And that's a good question, right? Because that on the surface, that you think, hey, maybe that's going to prevent them from being able to gain access to me. It's not a bad idea. You can enable it. Just know that it's not necessarily going to protect you from an attack from Russia, right? So I talked a little bit about botnets, about that botnet network being taken offline. Well, if the hacker in Russia is telling a botnet in Texas to then attack your system, you blocking Russia is not going to block that botnet. So, you know, don't think that, hey, if I'm just going to go in and block Russian IP addresses and websites, now I'm safe. No, there's way more than that in cyberspace to make sure you're properly protected. So it's a good thought, and definitely is a step you may want to take, but it's not enough to ensure that you're protected against attacks from that nation. So I don't see any other questions. So I think I'm going to move on and get back to all the other things I need to get done today. Hopefully you guys have a wonderful day. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast and you could understand me. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.